If you own a home in Florida, or you're thinking about buying a home in Florida, you need to watch this interview. This is part 3 of our Florida property tax series. In part 1, we explained how Florida property taxes work today. In part 2, we broke down the property tax proposals currently being discussed and what could potentially be on the ballot this November. Now, we're going straight to the source. There's been a lot of talk lately about Florida property taxes. You've probably heard people say they're going away. You've seen headlines, social media posts, and politicians discussing major changes. But what's actually happening? To help answer that question, I recently sat down with Seminole County property appraiser David Johnson. David is currently serving his 5th term as the Seminole County property appraiser. And as the elected official responsible for valuing every property in Seminole County, he has a unique perspective on how Florida property tax system works. He has no say-so in how the taxes are collected or spent. He does, however, have a deep understanding of what the current proposals could mean for Florida homeowners, not just in Seminole County, but throughout the state of Florida. During our conversation, we discuss how Florida's property tax system works, what's actually being proposed, some of the biggest misconceptions homeowners have, and what Florida property owners should be paying attention to moving forward in the coming months. I learned a great deal from this interview, and I think you will too. Whether you agree with the proposed changes or not, my goal is simply to help you better understand the facts so you can make informed decisions for yourself and your family. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Seminole County property appraiser, David Johnson. David, thank you for taking the time for sitting down with us today. I truly appreciate it. For those who may not know you and who you are and what you do, could you take just a minute and introduce yourself and tell the audience what the Seminole County property appraiser actually does?
Yeah, so I'm David Johnson, the Seminole County property appraiser. What the property appraiser does in each of the 67 counties, and certainly me here in Seminole County, is we value all the property, both real and tangible personal property. And we also administer all the exemptions from property taxes allowed by law. Most people are most familiar with the homestead exemption.
Right.
So those are the 2 biggest jobs that we do here in each of the 67 counties.
So let's talk about current property tax discussion, because it's a topic everybody is discussing lately. I'm sure you've been inundated by it. There's been a lot of talk about eliminating property taxes as a whole and in the entire state. From your perspective, what is being discussed today?
So the governor, about a year and a half ago, came up with an idea. He wanted to eliminate property taxes on homesteaded properties. Well, to your point, at first he said, let's eliminate property taxes. And then it kind of morphed into, well, no, I'm really only talking about homesteaded property. So that's kind of where we are. That was the table that was set. A number of ideas and proposals were thrown out there about how do you do that. And remember, this is a huge, diverse state. And so what may work here in Seminole County more than likely is not going to work in Miami-Dade, and certainly is not going to work back to Dixie County, okay? So how do you come up with a proposal that is fair statewide that makes sense? So a lot of iterations, and where we've kind of landed, or where the state's landed, is this concept that we're going to ask the voters in November, because again, this is a constitutional amendment. Everything that my office does is directly required by the state constitution, and there's a number of statutes that we have to follow, but I just get the privilege of administering what kind of the voters said. And in Florida, our tax system, our property tax system, is embedded in the state constitution. So anytime you want to change that, only the voters can do that. About every 20 years, remember back the last time we did a major property tax revision where we created portability, where we increased the homestead exemption from 25 to 50, that was 2008. So about 20 years later, here we are again, and we're going to do something again, or talk about doing something again. So the proposal that's out there is to take that $50,000 homestead exemption that's currently on the books and move it to $150,000 on January 1, 2027, and to $250,000 on January 1, 2028, if the voters so approve that. And it's not just a 51% decision, it's a supermajority. Again, to change the Constitution, it takes 60% plurality to make that happen. So that's what's going to be on the November ballot.
And at this point in time, and we are at the end of June, it has passed both houses of the legislature, so it will be on the November ballot.
Correct. So what's happened is it's, and again, the governor had a proposal out there. The governor has no access to the ballot, I call it. He he has a bully pulpit. He can talk about policy and procedure. Only the House and the Senate can put something on the ballot. But there will be an initiative, to answer your question, on the November ballot that talks about increasing the homestead exemption from 150 to 250. And I want to do one more caveat.
Please.
It's only for non-school taxes. So it's like, well, what's a non-school tax? Well, that's the cities and the counties, water management districts. You will always continue to pay property taxes for schools.
That's a good thing.
That is, and the governor did not want to do that.
Interesting.
But it was, it became a cost situation. It's $20 billion.
Right.
Where do we find that from?
Yep.
And so he had to kind of coalesce to that concept. And again, he doesn't have access to the ballot. He can only put proposals out there, and the legislature writes those proposals. So I think one of the big misperceptions out there is that the public, if this passes, I'm never going to see a tax bill again on my house.
That was going to be my next question. What misconceptions do we have?
Yeah, that's huge. I'm not going to see a tax bill again if my house is valued under $250,000. Not true.
You will.
You will, because of the school taxes at the very least. And then I suspect because of the amount of money that we're talking about, if you take the exemption to that level, the amount of revenue that gets lost to the particular cities or counties, we can cut some spending, obviously, but it's a big number. You probably cannot cut all of that out because the biggest part of your property taxes are paid, other than school taxes, are paid to public safety. Sheriff, and that's fire. That's 71%, basically.
Wow,
in
that's a huge number.
It's a huge number. So,
Wow. So that kind of goes to my next question. If Florida were to eliminate property taxes, or to decrease them, I guess in this case, it's better than eliminate them, where does the funding come from? The money that's currently generated by those property taxes, where does it come from?
I think it'd be a combination of situations. I think you will see some potential cuts, but I think the more logical thing that's going to happen is, again, there's two parts to the equation for a tax bill: value and the rate. I think you will see some movement in the rate because nothing in this proposal puts a brake on how much the rate can go up. So that's one part of it. So you could potentially see, I call it a tax shift away from homesteaded property owners to non-homesteaded property owners, renters, commercial property owners, et cetera. So I think that's maybe part of it. There's another thing that sits out there that a lot of people are already paying, what we call non-ad valorem assessments. Your garbage service here in Seminole County, your street lights, those types of things, they are not based on the value of your home. It's based on what does that service cost. And so you take the cost of the service, divide it up by the number of units that are benefiting from that, and you get a whole number. I think you'll see some of that shifting from ad valorem assessments, the value-based assessments, to more non-value-based assessments.
If we're looking at the taxes as a whole, as a tax base, what services are most dependent from real estate tax revenue? What gets paid?
Yeah, in Seminole County and in local government in general, the property tax is the primary funding source for local government. Remember, this is a state initiative. State gets no property taxes. this is all locally funded. Most of the state services are funded through the sales tax. So take the state out of it. It's always easier to spend someone else's money too, by the way.
Or to make them spend less.
Exactly. So, but in this county and across the state, the primary thing that those property taxes are spent on, other than schools, is public safety. And that's fire, it's police, it's your sheriff's department, and again, that's 70+%. And so, and a lot of that is salaries. I mean, you know, the sheriff's department is running a jail, they're running a sophisticated law enforcement agency. It's very, very expensive. And so, some of that money is going to have to get made up because we just cannot have, you know, not have a police or close the jail.
Yeah, or not have a fire department.
Right, exactly.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that local governments would face? I mean, if you take that much of their money away, what do they do?
I think some cities, even here in Seminole County, some cities will probably not going to miss much of it because it depends on what their tax base looks like. We have cities, for example, the city of Altamont Springs, where they have a very robust commercial tax roll. They lose a few $1 million a year. They can probably afford to do that. They're not going to love it, but they can probably afford to do that. They only get about 10% of their ad valorem tax revenue from homesteaded properties. You go to a Winter Springs or even an Oviedo, where it can be 50-60% is from homesteaded properties. And so they're going to have a harder challenge of closing that gap. And they're going to have to make some decisions about, are we going to increase the rate? Are we going to consolidate some services? Do we, not eliminate our fire department, but do we consolidate the fire department with Seminole County's fire department? Because that's done by several cities across the county. And again, that's just here in Seminole County. You take that, what we're talking about here, and multiply it exponentially across the state. Every community is having the same conversation, or should be having the same conversation.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, municipalities that have a broader tax base, that have more commercial, industrial, versus just homesteaded residential properties, will have an easier time with this. And if we get into the more rural counties of the state that almost their entire tax base is residential, they have a challenge on their hands.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. So.
Are there any examples from other states that Florida maybe should be paying attention to?
So the only state that somewhat has a similar taxing system as Florida, and that's probably not anything to really be bragging about, is California, because they have these Proposition 13. In fact, that's what Save Our Homes is modeled after. There's some nuances between the two. But again, California also has a state income tax. So they're not as dependent on the property tax as Florida is. I know the state of Texas, the state of Tennessee are also having conversations about property taxes. And you see this a lot in the high growth states where they've had a huge influx of population. Market values have gone up over the years because of that supply and demand issue. They're having more thoughtful conversations about how do we take care of some of these situations? But there's really no direct comparison. This is kind of out there. If we do this big of a decrease in taxable value, because there's really nothing to backfill it. There's nothing, there's been conversations about, well, just raise the sales tax. Well, that's going to take a legislative authority to do that.
And that's a significant increase on that sales tax.
Exactly. So those conversations, if this does pass in November, may have to happen at the state level. Like, how do we do that, and how do we make some of that happen? But no, this is kind of uncharted territory across the country.
Are there any alternative plans being passed around out there?
Not at this point. And I think we're going to see what the community ends up looking like as far as what they think, how, if this passes, does it pass by an overwhelming majority? If it fails, does it fail by just a small majority? I think we're going to continue to talk about property taxes because there are really some challenges out there that probably need to be a more tailored approach, for the elderly, folks 65 or older. Should they get, a bigger benefit? Probably. You can still make it income-based, but should there be something for them? Certainly, as one thing that we see here in the office and my colleagues see across the state, I think you hear as a real estate professional, is those new home buyers. And whether that's the guy or gal who just graduated from college and buying their first home, or the person that's moving here for the first time, they're the ones that are kind of shocked and having to pay the freight, if you will, if they bought a home that's had a cap on it for a number of years. So that's probably where the attention needs to be made, is to first-time home buyers and to the elderly. And probably, if you want to do something on, we talked about when the property sells, it resets immediately. One of the things you could probably do, and we've had this conversation, we being property appraisers, rather than being a one-year deal and a reset, make it happen over a 3 or 5 year period of time. So it's more, layered and more gradual and more predictable. So there's things that could be done. And I do believe that the homestead exemption probably does need to be increased, because it's not been increased for a number of years.
20 years.
It's 20 years, right. And certainly home values have gone up exponentially over that time frame.
Sure.
But probably going from 50 to 250 in 2 years is a little bit fast.
It's a big jump.
Yeah, and so anyway, those are things that I think if this does not pass, you will still hear that conversation moving forward across the state. So.
As someone who spends every day working with property values and tax systems, what do you believe homeowners should be paying attention to over the next year or two?
Well, I think the biggest thing between now and November is to try to get as educated as they possibly can on the potential impacts if this amendment were to pass. I think there's going to be a lot of good information out there. There's going to be some bad information out there.
Always.
And obviously you're going to have to be as an informed voter to try to come up with the right decision. But I think that's the key, is to try to educate yourself, try to make sure that what you're hearing and who you're hearing it from makes sense. But I think the biggest takeaway I could give folks is there's no silver bullet. You're going to continue to pay property taxes. It's just a matter of how much, because there are a certain level of services that government has to do. Core services. And in fact, the Constitutional Amendment talks about core services that have to be funded. And the first one on that list is public safety. And so just because your revenue has declined doesn't mean the expenses have declined. And so just keep all that in mind. And certainly if there's alternative revenue sources, let's have that discussion. But right now, the cities and the counties are pretty confined at what they can do. And in this county, we have an extra penny sales tax that the voters have self-imposed on themselves for over 30 years. So they get it. They know that they're willing to tax themselves for a certain quality of life and level of services. So again, just pay attention, try to get as much information as you possibly can. And remember, this is a statewide initiative. So even though the folks in Seminole County, which I have great confidence in, are going to say, you know what, I don't know. But if our friends in the South or the North say, we think this is a swell idea, and it gets to 60%, then we're all going to live with it.
We'll see what happens.
Exactly.
If you could clear up one misconception about Florida property taxes for every homeowner in the state, what would it be?
I think the biggest thing is, again, those new property owners who get that shock when the values reset, and just knowing that that's going to happen. I know they're informed about it. There's tools out there from calculators, and again, the underwriters, the title companies, all of them are disclosing it, but people just sometimes forget. So that's the main thing, is just remember that that's going to reset. It's kind of the cost of doing business, if you will. And so that, I think people continue to move here because we still are a relatively low tax state. 26 out of 50, third largest state. It still makes a lot of sense.
It does.
But just understand that that's going to happen, and there's going to be inequity, but it's an equity allowed by law. So I don't love it,
Part of it.
But that's just part of it. So yeah.
Got it. David, thank you again for taking the time to sit down with us and explain what you do and what this office does. I truly appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Barrett. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you. I know there is a lot of information that has been thrown out here today, a lot of opinions that are out there right now, and I appreciate you helping us better understand how the system works. For everyone watching, if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have questions about buying real estate, selling real estate, investing in real estate, or just taxes, feel free to reach out. Our number and our contact information is at the bottom of the screen. And if you would be so kind to like and subscribe the videos, that would be great. We look forward to seeing you on the next video. Take care.